So I just want to preface this by saying this is, at this moment, the most recent buyer broker agreement. It's dated at the bottom of December of 2023. However, at the top, it says 2024. What Ashley Strauss Martin is telling me is that we should have new forms out sometime between the 26th of July and August 1st. Because for GAR, this is when, August 1st is when everything kicks in. That's when you'll be required to have a buyer broker agreement. And the commission or compensation is what they're now calling it. I'm an old dog, so it's hard to remember compensation, but that will be going off in MLS. Any questions about that? Amy?
If we already, like, let's say we just signed one with the provider this week, because we did, and if we are going to be working with them and it goes into August, are we gonna need to redo this DBA with the new form, or can we use the one we already have existing?
I would think if you signed up before this, you could use, I mean, I don't know what, I haven't seen the new one. It has been, NMAR has a forms committee. They drafted it along with the help of Ashley Strauss Martin. Then it goes to the exec committee at NMAR. They have approved them. There's supposed to be like 10 new forms. So, the situation is why they're being dragged out. They hired somebody to just do this portion to get them uploaded, that kind of thing, and he quit. So Ashley Strauss Martin is trying to do everything on her own without any help. And then also there is the fall conference for NMAR that's coming August 13th through the 15th up at Sandia. So that I'm sure Ashley and her legal update that day will go over all the new. Oh, yeah.
Bev Hilton is doing one at GAR, August 22nd. It's all the new forms that have come and gone and all that.
Perfect.
For
Okay.
CEs.
Thank you. So I would say, I think Beverly is like the best instructor in the state, and then she's also on the forms committee. So she is responsible for drafting these. Okay, so all of our contracts, be it this buyer broker, the listing agreement, or the purchase agreement, all start with these buyer broker duties. So you're gonna have buyers who probably never fill, even if they're savvy buyers, they may not have filled out a buyer broker agreement before. So the only thing you need to tell them about this first page is section A. You as the buyer broker owe these duties to the seller. So 1 through 5 would be duties, even though you're representing the buyer, these would be duties you owe to the seller. Then for the buyer, there's an extra form over there by Marie. So you're gonna be representing the buyer, you're gonna include everything in section A and section B will be duties you owe to that buyer. Dropping down to section B, paragraph 6, that talks about the various types of brokerage relationships that are available in New Mexico. However, we do not do exclusive agency or dual agency. So what you're gonna do is tell the seller that, the buyer, that yes, these are available in the state of New Mexico, but here at Keller Williams and most of the large brokerages, they only do transaction brokerage. So I would even circle that just to make them aware of that. Dropping down to number 7, it says unless otherwise authorized in writing, a broker who is directly providing real estate services to a seller shall not disclose the following to a buyer in a transaction. So these would be things that the seller may have told you that the seller does not want you to tell the buyer. The only way you could tell these is if you get it in writing from the seller. So the seller says, I have to be in North Carolina by August 15th. And you would say, okay, is it okay if I tell the buyer that? That's your time frame. And then if he says, yes, I'm okay with that, then follow up with a meeting. All right, dropping down to D, it says any information the seller has requested in writing remain confidential unless disclosure is required by law. So then dropping down to, paragraph 8, it says unless otherwise authorized in writing, a broker who is directly providing real estate service to a buyer shall not disclose the following to the seller. So same thing. There are certain things that the seller may or may not want the buyer to know and vice versa. One example for a buyer might be maybe his mother and father-in-law live 2 doors down, and that's the reason they want this house. Well, if you mention that to the seller, they may think, oh, well, that's very innocent. However, the seller may think, hey, this is our buyer, and could use that as a negotiation against the buyer. So be very, very careful what you say. All right, and then you're gonna have the buyer's initial down at the bottom of cover page 1. Any questions about that? Okay, at the top of cover page 2, transaction coordinator, and within the last couple of years, the definition of transaction coordinator has changed. It is now a person who is licensed, has a New Mexico real estate license, and they're performing the duties for you as the buyer broker. They have the same broker duties that you do, and then in that, anything that's in bold and caps means that there's been some lawsuit for some reason why they want to draw attention to it. So it says TCs owe broker duties as set forth on cover page 1. Attention TCs, use NMAR form 2100 to make any disclosures any disclosures required by broker duties. So say your TC may know the seller to the property. That would be something that they would need to disclose on 2100. And then on that line, you're going to write the name of your TC. Under number 2, conflict of interest, material interest. This would be if you have been friends with the buyer for some time, maybe your kids are on a soccer team together, I would go ahead and disclose that because this says anything of a business, personal, or family nature. So I think that pretty much encompasses everybody. Adverse material facts, number 3, anything you know about the property. We had one the other day with a pre-inspection. It showed up aluminum wiring. Now, some people may think that's an adverse material fact, others may not. So if you have a doubt whether it is or not, go ahead and dispose of it. All right, any questions about the top of cover page 2? Okay, then you want each of your buyers to sign this. And then you're going to complete that next section below. Then here again, here's bold. Be sure and go over these paragraphs with the buyer. So this is regarding dual representation. This would be if you happen to have the listing that the buyer, maybe the buyer called you on a sign call and he wants to go look at your listing. Then in a case like that, that could potentially be dual representation because you have a written listing agreement with the seller. And now after August 1st, you're going to have a buyer broker agreement. So that would be written agreements on both sides. So since this is all new for buyers, I don't know if you're going to have buyers out there who are going to say, well, if I'm paying you to represent me as my buyer broker, I don't necessarily want you representing the seller. So I don't know if you'll have to deal with that conversation or not.
Can you explain the difference between dual representation and dual agency, just so I can explain that better?
Sure, yeah. So with dual agency, then you have loyalty, fiduciary, et cetera, where with dual representation, it's just that you have written contracts, but you don't have agency. And if somebody wants to know about agency, whether they should ask you to be their agent or not, the way I explain it, which people seem to think is easy enough, is if Tony is my buyer agent, then he is responsible for, hi Linda, come on up here if you want. He is responsible for everything I say and do as the buyer, and vice versa. If whatever Tony says, if we have an agency agreement, whatever Tony says or does, the buyer is liable. So typically, when you explain it that way, the buyer's gonna say, oh, I don't want agency. I don't want to be liable to that degree. Sometimes attorneys will say, oh, yes, I want you to be my agent. So if that is a conversation, come to me and we'll talk about it. The reason I asked Linda to come also is because I'm going through the contract that Linda has been having her buyers sign this buyer broker agreement for how many years?
10 or 15
Yeah, so I thought,
different versions of.
if you have practical questions on somebody who's using it or possibly, let's go the other way.
I have a hard enough time as it is. There we go.
Linda's also commissioner at the real estate commission. So.
Hold that against me.
Okay, Tony, does that answer your question? Okay, so agency, we don't want to do agents.
No, don't do agency, please.
Okay, so we just finished number 3 on cover page 2. So as I say, if you get a pre-inspection, the one the other day came up with aluminum wiring, if you think that may be an adverse material fact for somebody, then go ahead and dispose it. Sometimes we've had properties where they've had a fire. So if you're aware of that. One seller didn't tell us that there had been a fire, and then when they went up to do the inspection, all the rafters were charred. So,
He didn't think there was an adverse material.
I guess not, no. House was still standing. Okay, so if your buyer says, yes, I'm fine with you being the listing broker, then they will sign below on those bottom 2 lines.
Oh, we're talking about dual representation?
Yes,
I always say no.
okay, well, yes, so Linda's standard of practice is she doesn't want to represent both parties. At Keller Williams, we don't dictate whether you do or don't.
I'll
That
just
is-
give you my big opinions.
Go ahead.
Yeah. No, it's true. And from the stuff I've been seeing as a commissioner in the background, the behind the scenes, nothing will get you in trouble faster than anything in the drugstore than dual representation. It's just kind of, somebody's gonna be unhappy, is what I found out.
Yeah, we had one where one broker was representing the buyer and the seller. And both the buyer and seller called me at one point and said, he's being more fair to the other party than he is.
Oh, my.
Okay, so he probably was being fair to both, but that was their feeling.
Yeah.
Right.
So you're going to check one of those 2 boxes. That if the broker has the listing, the first box is the broker shall refer the buyer to another broker to represent the buyer. So in a case like this, you would probably do a referral agreement between you and that new buyer broker. The other second box says that the buyer and broker shall be released from all obligations under this buyer broker agreement as to broker listed properties only. So that the buyer may obtain any alternative broker to represent him. So in a case like this, you could not have a procuring clause if the buyer said, no, I don't want you representing both parties.
Is it possible to, like, say, refer to somebody and have somebody in the office do it, or?
Yeah. That's what I would suggest. That, yeah, because you've already got a relationship with a buyer and, I would say, is that what you do?
I ask them, if you don't have a broker, let me know and I'll try to find you a good fit. But if you already have one, I look forward to hearing from them.
I've worked on the other end of a referral that way for a broker here that didn't want to double end it.
Right.
It was fine.
And we have, yeah,
I gave her, there was a small referral fee back as part of the commission, and it was totally fair.
and a lot of buyers, I think, because there's so much news about all these changes, that I think you may see buyers being more apprehensive about you representing both sides.
Right.
Or they come to you because they think, I'll get the house cheaper.
Right.
You're only gonna do it for this percentage.
They won't have to pay it.
And I won't have to pay somebody. And I've been warning my seller clients right up front, if this is what's gonna start happening. I don't ask them, I just tell them I don't do dual representation. 100%, I've not had any seller say, gee, I really want you to do that. They'll say, good, I don't like it either. It also kind of saves me from having to, show somebody else's client a house. Cause, you know, my broker's out of town, can you just open it up for me? We had that conversation.
Right.
And as long as the seller knows you're not opening it up for anybody else's client or, you know, a broker that's in a different MLS.
That does arise as well.
I think that.
That's an opportunity for a referral too.
Right, yeah. Yeah, that's a great idea. Okay, so the buyers are gonna sign at the top to acknowledge that the broker duties, and then at the bottom, they are only gonna sign this if they agree to you representing both parties. Okay, so if it's not signed, they're saying, no, you're just working with me. All right, any questions about cover page 2? All right, getting on to page 1 of the 1206. I think probably the new buyer broker agreement will still be called 1206. And what Ashley has mentioned is because so many MLSs throughout the country are changing their forms as of, well, NAR's date is August 17th. It's just that GAR has decided to do August 1st. Santa Fe did July 1st. So the fact that there are MLSs all over the country, our vendors who are used by other MLSs are going to be extremely busy. So we have no way of knowing when the new documentation, the new forms are going to be in Instanet and, what's the other one? SkySlope.
Well, all
Or dot loop. So we have no way, that's out of our control. But they will be available by August 1st on the NMAR site. So that would be where you find them. Okay, so then, buyer commitment on number 2, I would just do purchase. I mean, there's one, we don't have, to cover us for property management. And there's really no money in it to represent a tenant. So I would only take somebody who's actively looking to purchase a house. Okay, then dropping down to A, all-inclusive commitment. This would be the buyer grants to the undersigned brokerage the exclusive right to assist the buyer in locating and in the purchase of real property generally described below, or any other real property which is acceptable to the buyer. Buyer will not work with any other real estate broker or without the broker to negotiate or purchase any type of property described in this paragraph. So here, I think if I were you, I would make this as broad as possible. So as far as the general area, you might say Albuquerque area and surrounding cities and adjoining counties, something like that. You're gonna check the residential box, probably vacant land. And then for other, I would go ahead and for other, I'd put new construction, because sometimes they don't think to include you. Any input on that? Is that about what you said? Okay.
Alice,
Yes,
I've been putting greater Albuquerque area, is that sufficient?
well, it would, but I'm just thinking, what if they want to go to Berlin or Las Vegas?
We just wrote New Mexico.
Mexico. That's not our license.
Right. Yeah,
It's like, here's us a referral fee if it's.
Go down to
Los
Salinas
Lunas or
or-
Las Cruces or something.
right, yeah, yeah. Okay, yeah, that would definitely be broad.
That's
Good.
I was thinking the same way, like, I hadn't filled these out in forever, I'm like, I don't wanna limit this.
Well, that was my concern, that we would say, Albuquerque, and then, well, what if they found Rio Rancho?
Rio Rancho.
Right. It's like, if they're trying to get out of it for some reason, they would use a loophole like that.
I like that.
Now, farm and ranch is classified as residential, correct?
No, it's its own little entity.
Can we sell? Are we licensed to?
Yes, you're licensed to sell farm and ranch, vacant land, residential and commercial within the state of New Mexico. However, my personal opinion is if you're not that familiar with Carnum, the commercial, or you're not a member of Carnum, it would be better to refer commercial broker or commercial buyers to a commercial broker. If it's anything like a fourplex or below, fine, that's considered residential. But if it's larger than that, I would probably ask for a referral and give it. We always want to do what's best for the customer. And we don't want to get into, somebody wanted to sell somebody a store up in Espanola, and it's like, no, I mean, we don't know that much about Espanola, nor do we know that much about selling a store, what's included and all that, so that would not be the best thing to do.
Assuming your buyer agrees in the discussion you have, just really check everything. In the event they want a fourplex or a threeplex for commercial, anything you don't feel comfortable with, refer out.
Right, yeah, so, yeah, commercial triplexes and fourplexes are considered residential income, so that would be covered by the residential. And as I say, commercial is typically somebody wants to lease a space. I think, Roberta, you had a customer who wanted to lease some office space. And then I think he was even thinking about building an office building.
Yeah, I referred it out.
Yeah, so when in doubt, refer it out. That's sort of right.
Nice.
Yeah. Okay, so limited, we're on 2B, limited commitment. This would be if you get a floor call and Tyler's on phone and these people call and say, we want to see this property over on Haynes. So in a case like that, he, after August 1st, is going to have a buyer broker. So he's going to maybe check this box to only show them Haynes. So it would be a limited buyer broker agreement. And then I also wanted to mention, as of August 1st, NMAR's coming out with an abbreviated agreement. So it'll be a buyer broker short. Tony,
So like you meet the guy that just wants to go to Haynes, he really likes you. He wants to go like at like 3 different places, then you have to redo this buyer broker again.
yeah, or you could ask him at the time you're completing it, could I go ahead and just complete it with A, just in case this one doesn't work for you, then we'll be covered to show other property. It's just like some people, I think they're gonna have a lot of confusion. I see buyers signing 4 and 5 buyer broker agreements, not realizing what they're doing. So I think at the onset, it's gonna be a mess.
And it's on us to ask if they've entered
Right.
into a formal agreement with anybody else.
Yes, that is on us.
That's get messy fast.
Well, yeah, because a lot of times, if somebody's made an offer on a property, the buyer broker just slips all the paperwork to them and they sign, and it's amazing the number of times buyers will insist they did not sign a buyer broker, and then when you get them under contract and they had signed a buyer broker, and now that first buyer broker wants to be compensated by that customer, and they'll say, oh, I didn't remember. It's like, well, they just sent it to you with all the other paperwork and didn't explain it. Okay, term, what I suggested on this is 6 months, but what do you do?
6 months.
Okay,
6.
okay, good, all right. And then we're now into July, so just keep in mind, if it is 6 months, that's gonna push you over into 2025. Doesn't seem possible. So.
Quick.
Unless you can't stand them a minute.
Thank you, Al.
Yeah, yeah,
I could do that.
yeah. Okay, and then you have your buyer's initial at the bottom. Any questions about page 1? Perfect.
What?
Okay, the top of page 2. Oh, I should be asking, is there anybody on?
I could see this being at my house. Sorry, my cat's out on my keyboard.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Mine does that all the time.
You're good.
Okay, thanks. All right, so anybody that's on Zoom, just ask questions as we're talking about them. Okay, so the top of page 2, paragraph 4, these are what you as a broker owe to the buyer. And I would just read them all, because sometimes we make the assumption that the buyer knows what we're doing for them, and they may not. So when you look at this list, that's pretty lengthy, the things that we do to assist them. So I would just reiterate, that's what
They,
they do.
they don't know until we don't sue them.
Right.
I mean, I've had buyers that didn't want to listen to my services and then they go out and then they come back and go, oh my God, this is awful.
Yeah.
I need your help. You go, well, good.
Yeah.
That's the point.
Okay, and then number 5, these are the buyer obligations that the buyer owes to you. So I would read those to them as well. Just so there's no misunderstanding at the onset. You don't want to be working with them for hours or years. And then have them go out and buy a new home, and it's like, oh, I didn't know you could help me with that.
And
What happened?
I would just say, as far as getting somebody to understand this so that they will sign it. You've really got to sit down and talk to them about this, and I'm into storytelling. Like, let me paint you a picture about what it feels like to go into a builder's office. You gotta tell them that you're, with me, and this is what's gonna happen if you don't. I won't be able to help you with this or this. Sometimes they'll really start to understand it if you paint the picture of what this process is gonna feel like to them. If you just read this, it's pretty dry. But I'd just like to, this is what happens, this is what you'll have to do for your own, and this is what can happen if you're on your own and you don't have somebody guiding you. And then just tell them a story. I've been in this long enough, I got some big ones. But, so just try to make it casual. But get the concepts across, I think.
Amy?
So if you have a buyer, this might be a dumb question, if you have a buyer broker agreement with someone and then they go off radar and they go to a new construction, does this at all supersede anything? Like, you're supposed to talk to the new construction people before your people go in, so you can secure your compensation there. So if we already have this in place and they accidentally go off and they go to talk to a builder, does that hold any weight at all with the builder, do you think?
Well, it probably wouldn't hold any weight with the builder, because they have a little sign-in sheet and they'll say, do you have a realtor?
So
And
they
if
don't have to, the builder.
They don't,
have to honor
but you could collect from the buyer.
Yeah.
I mean,
That would suck.
do we want to sue
You have to make your
a,
buyer do that,
do we
right?
want to sue a buyer
No,
or
I know,
for the
that would
public?
suck, that
Right.
would really suck.
Yeah, it would.
I hate that.
But yeah,
We could all, I mean, you could show them this and say, this was signed before your little thing at your office was signed.
I don't,
You know,
I had some builders say, well, did you have a buyer broker agreement? And they expected, 10 years ago, they always expected no.
no.
And then when you answer yes, then they, oh, okay, so it's hard to say that it's contractually, you're not obligated, but sometimes they'll play nice.
okay, number 6, the
Well,
brokers.
there are builders who are realtors and do the same thing, so.
Right.
That happened.
Number 6, broker's compensation in the event of a purchase. Important, here again, it's bold and capitalized.
Does Justine have a question?
Oh,
Does, you can fill in the blank, a dollar or what, a dollar amount or percentage. Can you add, or if there is additional coming from somewhere else, like a builder, can you add any kind of thing? It has to be exact.
It has to be exact according.
right, yeah, and that has to do with the transparency. That's why you have to put in an actual amount.
So say you put 3% and the builder or whoever's offering 3.5 or 4%, then can you just write an addendum as long as they agree?
I would do an addendum to the buyer broker.
Right.
Yeah,
Okay.
but I will tell you, probably what's gonna happen is the buyer's gonna say, well, I think you should give that money to me.
And why is that? Why would a buyer feel entitled to something they didn't earn or they don't have to pay you, right?
getting ready to spend it.
I'm trying to wrap my head around this, why?
Well, I think the fact that you have to bring it up to them, then they start questioning, okay, so this wasn't within the agreement I signed, so therefore this is a change, you want my approval and,
No is a complete sentence.
right,
So
yeah.
how would you approach that if you say, oh, they're gonna offer me 4% and then the buyer says, well, why don't they give it to you? How would you approach it?
Well, I mean, that's gonna have to be a conversation you have with the buyer.
Yeah.
Right, yeah, because I mean, you certainly need to tell them that, you can't just arbitrarily take 4% when
Yeah.
it says,
Without an agreement.
right, without an addendum to this buyer broker agreement. Another form that just came out is the termination of the buyer broker agreement. We never had one up till then, and there were times where you, as the realtor, wanted to get rid of a customer with a buyer broker, and you couldn't do it,
No,
so,
yeah.
so now you can do it.
So are buyers asking for the extra back? Has it happened already? Or is this just something people are assuming might or could happen? Like,
I'm thinking it may, and the
I'm always
reason,
of the opinion, if I don't put too much thought out there about what somebody might do.
Right, no.
What happen, right?
people out there are very savvy.
Yeah.
We had somebody, do you mind if I, we had a situation where somebody came through an open house, and it was listed with one of our brokers who does not double in. So when she called the listing broker, she went through the open house, was not being held by the listing broker, somebody else in this office was holding it. She called the listing broker and said she saw the open house and she wanted to buy the house. So then that listing broker said, I don't do dual representation, so therefore, why don't you go through the person who was holding the house open? So then the buyer did call the person who was holding the house open and knew that she was going to get a 3% commission. So she wanted the person holding the house open to give her as a buyer 1.5%.
What?
This has already happened.
Yeah. Told her to pound sand.
Well, this was like, this is a month ago. So people are savvy.
And that's the whole point of this thing.
Mhm.
You've got to have some steel nuts
Yeah.
to operate with this agreement. And I started using this when got real angry. And you know what it's like when you get angry about
And
something.
we know what it's like when you get angry.
Yeah.
Thank you. And you get a lot of resolve when you've been run over.
Yes.
And all of a sudden I was like, I will not do this again. I feel foolish. This is an awful thing to do. It's humiliating, all these self-torture things. But it made me use that and the second customer that walked in, I just tell stories.
Yeah.
Okay, because
We only have 2 hours, so.
So I had out of town people coming in. They were sitting down for their first meeting, let's pass around the pieces of paper on where it was a long time ago. Houses we're gonna go see, MLS sheets, and she's taken it all in. They're from Texas. I love Texas real estate. They operate at a much higher level. And they got all the MLS sheets and she had my pretty flyers and book and everything. And then she says, now don't we have to sign something with you? And I went, sweet. Oh, of course. And so I said, my buyer agent at the door, I said, go get that, and so we filled it out. And I realized at that moment, a high level, smart customer thinks they have to sign one of these. And I had just been run over by the train. And I thought, I just need to ask for what I want. And it isn't like we have to do this or it's a law or whatever. You just ask for which and just say, I need this signed. 99% of the time, people go, of course you do.
Especially when you hand them the pen.
Yeah, here. But it's true. So you have to really have resolve to make this work and you'll feel so good when somebody just goes, oh, okay.
Marie?
With the builder might even already have given them incentives.
Mhm.
So, because they give them, here, we're gonna do a buy down. we're gonna
Yeah,
do
good
this,
point, yeah.
All this kind of stuff, but then, and so you can, I would say you can go back and say, well, you've gotten all these incentives and the builder is giving me these incentives.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
So you've been using this form before it was even mandatory.
Absolutely. Yeah, in fact, I helped draft, when I was on the forms committee, this and the Santa Fe broker and I put this one together. We went through the old one. And everybody in the committee thought we were nuts because nobody uses this. And I went, they're going to.
Yeah, right.
They
It's
should.
good. It feels more simple nobody's gonna walk on you or screw you
Right.
over.
And I've been using broker duties as a thermometer for a long time. I just give them, I walk to an appointment, I hand a broker duties, I put broker duties on my email signature. And somebody who's gonna cheat, it's kind of like dating. If he doesn't answer the phone when you're in the house, it's a bad thing. And so you'll understand that. And so if you hand somebody broker duties and say it's state law, which it is, I have to present this to you as part of our statutes, which is true. Most people go, oh, okay. A cheater will say, I'm not signing anything. And you go, thanks for telling me. So you just have to be assumptive about it and value the contract. And well,
In your time.
and your time, and going back to the in-house referral, I got assigned, or whatever call it was, for a listing. I told him I don't do this, I assigned him over to Evan, he never showed up for Evan, I mean, he just ghosted you, right?
I'm trying to remember when that was, yeah. Oh, yes, yeah.
Yeah, oh, yeah, I'm coming to town and my car broke down, I'm getting a
Yeah,
divorce,
that's
my
it.
dog died, whatever it was. It was a whole list of things, so again, it's a safety thing to have one of these.
In
Okay.
Texas, they have to send the buyer broker agreement. That is one thing that Texas makes them do.
Well, that and broker duties,
We don't bat an eye about entering into, we have to enter into a contract with our seller. We don't bat an eye about telling the seller, this is our fee.
Right.
Thank you.
It's just different because sellers are paying us out of the proceeds after they've already sold the house. And buyers are like, well, I've already got $40,000 in closing costs and down payment. And you're asking for another $9,000 or whatever.
Mhm.
But we have to look at buyers the same way we look at sellers. We don't have a problem telling them.
And
This is what
I
we do.
would say to get real clear about what a good negotiator you are and how well you get along with your other colleagues. Like, I'm really gonna do my best to make sure that we get the seller to do this compensation that works out for you. And make them understand that, you know, we're gonna be in a whole new environment. We are really gonna have to get along. Like, I think we've been like this on transactions for so long, we don't even know what each other looks like in the grocery store. But now we're gonna be calling everybody, hey, Amy, remember me?
Please pay me.
Please answer your phone, Amy. So I think you're gonna have to really get skillful with being strong about what you need and getting along with everybody and letting your clients know, everybody in this business likes me, even if it's not true, but make them understand that that's what it's gonna take in order to get the information going, because I still don't know what's gonna happen, but there you go.
None of us do. Okay, getting back to paragraph 6, there is one line, I think it starts on line 6 of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, where it says in this version that the MLS, the listing will include that offer of compensation. So that will not be the case after August 1st. So that's one thing that will absolutely and unequivocally be changing. And then the next thing, it is important to note that MLSs do not require listing brokers to make an offer of compensation, and if compensation is offered, do not dictate the amount of compensation offered. So the reason for this is because of that lawsuit. We don't, commissions have always been negotiable. There's never been a set commission, but because we've said, oh yeah, the standard is 3%, 6%, whatever. That's why they are over several times in this agreement. It says that the amount, if it says the seller doesn't necessarily have to pay, and we are not going to dictate what the seller will pay you. So that's in there to protect. And then there is an MLS information sheet, so you might want to give that to your buyer as well. It's form 1820. So dropping down to 6A, since at the time you're signing this is before they ever find a house, I don't know how you'd say a dollar amount. So I would probably always check the second box, the percentage of the sales price of the property plus NMGRT. And the NMGRT is going to be based on where the house is located. So if it's Rio Rancho, it's going to be based on Rio Rancho taxes, or Albuquerque here. Okay, any questions about that?
So you said there's an MLS information form 1870.
1820. Yeah. It's lit, yeah, it's listed right there.
I have a question.
Mhm.
You know, because some people might want to say, hey, I only want to pay you $5,000, I don't want to pay you $10,000, whatever it is, regardless of the price of the house.
Okay, then that's a decision you would have to make as owning your own business. Are you willing to do it for 5,000?
I mean, they could, they have tried to do it for 1,000.
Right. Yeah, so I mean, yes, you certainly could use that.
I had that call the other day.
Can you tell them?
What were they saying? No, they past clients wanted to know what's going on.
Yeah.
And I tried to explain as clearly as I could. And she really understood it better than most people. And then she said, well, yeah, I heard I didn't ask her how she heard. I heard there was some realtor out there that was doing everything for $1,000. I said, you can always call rental trucks. So.
Call what?
Because it's like Shivani.
Oh, what?
It's like Shivani, it's limited service.
Right. Yeah, or same thing with,
There's different models.
Lisa.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can, Lisa Heaven Street, yeah.
Yeah.
They have
It's a lower
limited
stress
service.
level.
Okay, so then,
I should make a big bucks.
dropping down to paragraph B, this is the amount and payment. The bold part is what's critical here. Because if you've taken a buyer to a for sale by owner, you're gonna have to negotiate that before you even show them the property.
Where do you find the form 1820? I don't see it now. And
You find it in transaction desk or dot loop or.
I don't see it right now.
Okay, it should be in there.
It's
Is that-
under info sheets.
Yeah, it's under info. There's one entire section of information sheets. It's gonna be in there.
Okay.
Okay, so last bold sentence of that paragraph B, it says, the buyer agrees to pay the brokerage's expected compensation minus any amounts that the brokerage is able to collect from the listing brokerage or for sale by owner, seller as applicable. So that one is going to be on form 2301, where that's one of the new ones. It's called buyer broker compensation third-party beneficiary addendum.
Is it 2301?
Yes, 2301.
And that won't be out till like July or August.
Well, no, it's out now.
Oh, it is.
Yeah. 23, the ones that are out now, let me just go over this. Compensation and cooperation broker to broker is 1108. 2101 is the price modification or seller credit. If the seller is going to do a concession. Then there is the seller's compensation to a buyer broker. That's another good one to know, 4660. These are all out right now. And then the one that I mentioned, we now have the buyer broker termination. That one is 5115. And then another new one that is out is 1208. That is notice to an unrepresented buyer.
What was the number of the termination?
Termination is 5115.
I still don't see it. 1820.
Okay, I'll look for it later.
I've looked at that unwrapped buyer one. Well, because all the things we won't do.
Right.
That's wild. That's wild.
And that might be a conversation you have with your seller when you're taking the listing is, we may come to a situation where somebody who doesn't, they think they're gonna get a better deal by going directly to the seller. So they don't want you to represent them as a buyer broker, but then you as a listing broker, do you really want to do the whole thing for 3%? So that would be a conversation to have up front. Plus, they don't, Suze.
Okay, I get really confused on the compensation and the conversation that we have amongst our other folks that we're working with, the listing agents. So I make a phone call and I say, hello, are you doing compensation on this? Their compensation on this. And then they say, yes, there is, but I don't know what it is. So I've agreed with my buyer broker that for 3%. how do I even explain this? Or say 2% or 1% or whatever percentage we come up with. And I don't know what the compensation is from the listing broker. How do I communicate that to the buyer that I want the 3%, that it,
Okay, so what you want to do is include that 2301
okay,
with your purchase agreement. Because
okay,
the purpose of that one, it says it may be used by a buyer and included with a purchase agreement if when a buyer is requesting the seller to pay some or all of the buyer broker compensation.
to make that 3% if we decide on
Right.
3%. I
Yeah.
know that that's negotiable. So so when do I find out what the,
You're going, well, we have Shannon Steer, so I don't know if people heard her, but what she said is, you know, you can call a listing broker and ask, hey, are you paying a compensation? And the listing broker can say, yes, depending on the strength of the offer, they may not tell you what that percentage is.
okay,
And
so
so I would do the 2301 no matter what.
okay, so if the, so if the buyer, so if the buyer's broker is, now if the buyer is saying 3%, then, and the lister said, the seller said, I'll do 3%. The listing, the seller doesn't have to pay 3% anymore.
Well, I would ask the seller for it.
Okay,
I would use the 2301
okay,
and say, so you already know you're gonna get 3% from the buyer.
right,
They
right,
probably
right.
kicking and screaming said, yeah, I'll pay it if I have to.
right,
But they don't want it to pay
Right.
it. So then you're gonna use the 2301 to see if you can get any money from the seller.
okay,
So say the seller pays 1.5%, the buyer would then cover the rest.
Right. Yeah.
This is so much better for the consumers. It's so much more transparent.
Yes.
Yeah.
Wow.
So if a commercial broker one time really did go through $1 million transaction as representing a buyer, did not have a compensation agreement throughout the whole transaction and got paid nothing at closing and screamed bloody murder and went back to the listing broker, who's a big shot commercial broker. And he said, eh, you didn't ask for it. We didn't assume. So
okay.
that's how commercial works. Commercial works like
That's
this.
like an off market.
Yeah, they agree to cooperate, but they do not agree to
Yeah,
compensate.
it's like an off market, you have to send
Right.
the compensation.
Yeah,
Even in commercial, the seller usually pays, but they send it over.
Right.
sometimes.
Right.
So really on 6A, we would say 3%
Mm-hmm.
and then attach form 2301 when we put in an offer.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, and you tell the buyer, you know, we will attempt to get this from the seller. We're gonna use this form. However, we can't dictate what the sellers will or won't do.
I think along those
Asking for a
lines,
big carpet allowance.
Huh?
when Shannon was here last, she made a great point that like, when you're having those discussions, if a buyer's broker does call you, you're representing a seller, hey, what is your seller offering? You wanna be very careful how you answer that question going into that, have that discussion with your seller prior, because if you say we're offering 3%, and yet that buyer's broker has agreed to 2% in their buyer broker agreement, you just gave away 1% of
But
your
your buyer's
seller's
money,
money.
or your seller's
potentially.
money.
Right, so she advised answering, well, what do you, if a buyer's broker does call you, what are you offering on this house? Well, what's listed in your buyer broker agreement?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, to come back with that. What did your buyer broker
Could we
agreement
just
say?
write the offer without even asking? I mean, you could just write, just like asking for a $50,000 carpet allowance. You
Right.
could just write the offer and say, and included in this, here's my compensation. That way everybody's starting out on,
Right.
without any discussions. It's just an idea.
In an addendum, or you could have.
I use the 2301. I mean, that's gonna cover it. Now, a couple weeks ago, Cole Banker came out with a list of property addresses and said, we've already discussed this with our sellers, and these are the percentages our sellers willing to pay. However, based on what Sean just said, if I'm representing the seller, I probably just gave away 2-3% if the buyer had already agreed to pay his own buyer broker. So I am not, people said, are we gonna do that? No, you're not gonna do it.
No, I think that's ridiculous.
Right. Julian,
So if I have a seller and they call and they ask for compensation, I say, do you have a buyer broker?
the buyer. Oh, if you have the seller, right?
I have the seller.
Right.
Am I allowed to ask for a copy of the buyer broker? Cause he could just say, let's say he's like, yeah, 3% and his buyer broker is 1.5. So it's not kind of done behind the scenes like, oh, hey, we're gonna ask for 3% from the seller. And, here's this addendum so we can get it back up because they're gonna pay.
Yeah,
Am
I
I
think
allowed
you
to
can ask.
ask for a copy?
Well, Alice, they're gonna check when they may write a purchase agreement, it says with the buyer broker agreement.
Right, but you're still not gonna know with percentage.
Yeah. But does that become a part of the agreement? Like, when you check on section 47 or whatever it is it or what's included?
It doesn't require you to attach it
Yeah.
No,
with the offer currently,
Incorporated,
the
so-
Right.
buyer broker.
no, I've heard that title companies are gonna start requesting your buyer broker,
Oh,
so,
really?
Tony, did you have a question?
No.
Okay. All right,
No, Tony's about to leave.
Yeah.
It wasn't gonna move anything.
okay. All right, so just at the very bottom of page 2, in a box, anything that has a box around it is also important. A buyer warrants that they have read and understand the above compensation provisions. Further, buyer understands that the amount of compensation that buyer has agreed to pay brokerage herein is not dictated by MLS rules, the local, state, or national association of realtors, or local, state, or national law. Buyer affirms that the brokerage expected compensation set forth herein is an amount that the buyer and the brokerage have freely negotiated and agreed upon. So here again, if you want the seller to reimburse your buyer broker percentage, put in the 2301. All right, any questions about Evan?
I don't know if we want to get into the weeds with this, but I mean, I'm imagining situations where a buyer signs an agreement saying X percentage of a sale. And at the end of the transaction, they close on the house, and they go, oops, I miscalculated my bills, I miscalculated my closing costs and down payment, I don't have it. Like, it's like, that's gonna give birth to all sorts of other problems. Like, cause buyers might say, they may be desperate to buy a new house and close by a certain time, and they may sign this hastily, and then at the end, they'll say, I don't have the money.
But wouldn't it be put into like the settlement statement as a come to close
But
amount?
you
that they're
can't,
bringing?
can't squeeze blood out of a turnip.
Right.
Right, but that would be disclosed at some point before closing though, because it would be part of their come to close amount.
Well, I mean, I can see that potentially happening. Yeah, there was a comic I read someplace over the weekend that the buyer was giving his buyer broker a nice bouquet of flowers and some chocolate and said, thank you for helping me.
So, I mean, to that, probably should we be just working with the lenders on their pre-qual and being like, hey, this is like better understanding how the pre-qual is gonna go for me because they get qualified, so I think that's where we might be able to nip that above.
Well, but then if the appraisal comes in low and the buyer decides to put some money toward that, or if there are some repairs that the seller won't do, and suddenly the buyer thinks, gee whiz, I'm gonna have to replace that evaporative cooler. Suddenly the money that he was gonna pay you is gonna go to a repair. So I think this could potentially happen.
Well, it can go to repair until you negotiate that on the contract, right? Because our contract is super, like, they can't just decide they're gonna spend their money somewhere else.
I don't know how we force them to pay us. I don't know. You think about these first-time homebuyers that have to have seller assistance.
Right.
Yeah, are they gonna be able to pay us? I don't know.
I asked Mark over at Waterstown, I said, how do you handle that for first time home buyers? If they don't have the money?
What did he say?
He said you have to get back to them.
Oh, okay.
I just had to have a house closed, we had to have the seller pay part of the first time home buyer closing costs.
Right.
Because they only had so much money and the seller agreed luckily. But, I mean, I don't know how it's gonna work when they need an extra $9,000 or 10,
Right.
closing.
Well, and then also, what if you've gotten along you know, everything has been beautiful during the transaction and suddenly they get irritated with you the day before and it's like, I don't think you deserve, you know, I don't think you earned 9,000. I can see that happening too.
Well, that's what a seller could say the same thing. So how does that mean that the buyer, because
I don't know. I mean, I'm just thinking it's a
That's a
possibility.
good point.
I mean, the seller could say the same exact thing.
The psychology is different though, because we've already established that the seller can afford to pay us because we looked it out and we see what they. And it's kind of like, it's just equity that they've built up over the years.
And they're used to
House.
the tradition.
It's not another check that they're having to write, it's
Yeah.
just being subtracted from a larger number. So the psychology of it, I think, is very different.
Well, if you go out and sell, I mean, our mid-range house now is what, 450,000? And you $700,000, $800,000, $900,000 house, that's a big chunk to digest.
$1,000, yeah,
That's huge.
yeah.
Whew.
Well, like we said, when at the very beginning, when all this happened, that we would pop it in to, you know, like, it's a 450, you know, we're gonna pop it up to be able to cover the compensation.
Mhm.
Just like selling buyers closing costs, we used to do many years ago, the 3% closing costs. We just bumped up the price.
Right. That is another
And
possibility.
it was supposed to have lowered prices.
Yeah.
And lowered commission. That was my past client said, tell me about this thing where commissions are gonna get lower. I said, not in my world, but in other worlds, you know, and I say that now, I could just quit, you know. Once we see how to me, it reminds me of that game of Jenga,
Mhm.
where you keep pulling out little pieces
Mhm.
and then it's all gonna fall apart. And then the courts aren't even gonna confirm this until November.
Well, then, like if, if you add, say, the list price is 450. And you're offering 460 to cover your commission, which 10,000 probably wouldn't even cover your commission, then you gotta appraise. So that's another, that's gonna be another hurdle.
If
And
it's
in
written up by
the appraisal, you're gonna go,
compensation.
oh, we are not gonna do that, but then if the other things that I know that, the appraisers are doing or lenders are doing is that if it appraises, say it was 450 and it appraises that 460, that they can do repairs with that amount of money.
Hmm.
And pop it in.
I don't, there are so many unknowns right now. I mean, I'm telling you everything I know, but there are a
No way
lot
to
of
go
things.
until a bunch of people start doing transactions and seeing scenarios that nobody could have thought.
Right, yeah, just like when Richard Gibbons was here the other day, he asked for questions. And here he is, I would think he would know more than anybody, and there were a couple of questions asked in this room that he'd never had asked before. So that's what's gonna happen.
Right.
Okay, so, any questions about page 2 of the first agreement? So have your buyers initial both places, that box, the area with the box, and then at the bottom as well. Okay, then on page 3, the compensation earned and due. This would be, when are they going to be paying it? It would be at closing. And then they would need to pay it whether or not the buyer sought the assistance of the broker. So maybe you're working with a buyer broker as the buyer, and then that broker goes out of town and he ends up not thinking he did enough work for him, he still owes the compensation. That last sentence in paragraph A says, if any such transaction fails to close because of the default by the seller, compensation otherwise earned and due will be waived. So say the seller decides for some reason he's not going to sell, then obviously you're not going to collect the money from the buyer. If, on the other hand, if because of a default by the buyer, compensation earned and due under this agreement will not be waived. So if the buyer says, you know what, I'm not gonna go through with this, he could still owe you the 3% commission.
So you gotta figure out how to collect it.
Right,
But then that's not for the reasons of what's in the purchase agreement, say they couldn't qualify or whatever.
right, if it was a reason, like it didn't appraise, they couldn't do it because of income or something like that, yes, they wouldn't, but if they, I mean, we had one the other day that right before closing, they just decided they didn't want the house. So on something like that, I think you should be able to get paid.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, then dropping down to B, a protection period. This would be within X number of days after termination of this agreement. And I said 60, but I'm curious what you put in there.
60.
60, okay.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Do you put
Okay.
that in the listing agreement too?
Pardon me?
Do you put 60 in your listing?
So, 60 days, and now the only caveat would be if the buyer goes through and signs another buyer broker agreement with somebody else, then this protection period goes away. So keep that in mind. Let's see, in paragraph B, it says, this provision will not apply if a buyer enters into another exclusive agreement with another licensed real estate broker covering the same property or type of property covered by this agreement. This next paragraph is compensation for lease, and I just truly would not waste my time helping somebody get a rental. Paragraph 9 just says that sometimes what we see at Zillow, Trulia, or Realtor.com and probably Homes.com may not be accurate. And the reason for that is we're not a non-disclosure state. So a lot of times they don't know the actual closing costs. Other potential buyers in paragraph 10, the buyer acknowledges that the broker may make known to other buyer clients and customers the same or similar properties as the buyer is seeking to acquire, and the buyer consents to this activity. So this would be if you've got a property that's on the market for $275, that's going to be hot. You may be showing it to several different buyers. So you just need to tell the buyer, oh, by the way, I could potentially have another buyer for this specific property. Confidentiality of your offer. Be aware that sellers and or listing brokers may not treat the existence, terms, or conditions of offers as confidential unless confidentiality is required by law, which it isn't here in New Mexico with a transaction brokerage. Required by law, regulation, or by any confidentiality agreement. So this might be if Sally has a listing agreement with a seller and she checked the box, there are two boxes, existence or terms. So if she and her seller checked the terms box, then she could tell another buyer broker, yes, Amy's purchase agreement said this, and Kelly's purchase agreement said this. So if that box is checked on the listing agreement, which you're not going to know, then that could be something that she would not keep confidential. Okay, does that make sense? Okay. Non-discrimination. So this just says that in addition to fair housing, there's New Mexico human rights and the New Mexico Real Estate Commission regulations that prohibit discrimination. Expert assistance. If one of your buyers has questions that are legal, if that's something that maybe an accountant or CPA should be answering, or if they're even asking about zoning or surveying or inspections, your best answer is, I don't know. You know, and you might be able to direct them to a site where they could get the answer, but we're not going to guess at, a survey or, we're certainly not going to give them CPA advice, nor are we going to give them legal advice. Our best advice, and the longer I'm in real estate, the more often I say you really need to talk to a real estate attorney. And that is a perfectly good answer. Okay, consent to use electronic transmission. I would say probably 99% of our buyers are very savvy. So that box would be the parties do consent. And then that could change it. This paragraph just says that could change anytime during the transaction. The buyer can say, oh, well, I'm not going to be anywhere where I can electronically sign this. So could you please drive out to the Navajo reservation and sign this? What did you say, Marie?
No, that is something my father used to say.
Oh, okay, yeah,
It was too late.
okay, all right, so, yeah, we have people who have driven a long distance to get signatures.
If we ever have to do that, we stop at Gallup and see what's.
Oh, yeah,
I have to go, yeah, I just had one that he couldn't be, I don't know if it was from this global outbreak, he can't sign something, he's up in Colorado, and he's like, can you FedEx it to me?
Can you pay me back?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not even a fax.
Well, then if
So-
they make a mistake on something, it's just that.
Right, then it has to be resent.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I know, well, yeah, so hopefully she's really good.
Okay, this next paragraph is near and dear to my heart. Sales service provider
I'm
recommendations.
sorry.
We are now part of law because one of our realtors suggested 2 roofers. And for repairs, like one came in at 2,000, one came in at 2,500. The seller selected the one for 2,000. The seller moved out of the property. The roofer used a settling torch. The house burned down to the ground. Only thing left was the pool and the garage. So then we go to, and then my listing broker says, oh, well, these sellers have been friends for 30 years. They're not gonna sue us. And it's like, okay, I've heard that before. And they did sue us. They sued us. The seller's insurance company sued us. We lost in a bench trial. We went to appeal. And 3 judges upheld that judge's finding. So, yeah. And then the thing with, also, the other thing with that was Weiss would not cover us because they considered that personal property. So we had no coverage. Company didn't have coverage, nor did my listing
They
broker.
consider what percent?
The house burning down.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I asked twice. It's like, please,
That's the one you
please,
hear about in court all the time.
pardon me?
That's the one you hear in court all the time.
Oh, yeah, we're the example that actually saw someone use it. I've been in a couple of her classes
It's like
and,
Burning Man, it's called Burning House.
yeah, right, yeah. I've been in a couple of her classes and she'll say, I'm not gonna mention who this is, and it's like, yeah, everybody turns around and looks at me. You don't have to, Ashley. Everybody already knows.
Wasn't it that the contractor wasn't licensed?
The roofer was not licensed.
Yeah, the roofer was not licensed.
Why can't they go after the roofer?
He didn't have any money.
Yeah,
I mean, he was considered 51% liable, but he wasn't insured, he wasn't a licensed roofer. So, I mean, when this says, and then just this weekend, we had one where we had recommended, what do we recommend?
Real estate.
Oh, we recommended a pool company to do repairs. We represented we represented the seller, we recommended the pool company. And it was for thousands of dollars repairs. The pool company got the money and didn't do the repairs. So
Was it Premier?
pardon me?
Company, was it Premier?
Mm-mm.
Pool company? Oh, cause they did something like that to one of my buyers.
No, so I
I
asked,
didn't recommend them.
I said, please tell me you didn't recommend this, this company, this pool company. I was like, yes, I did.
So I'm trying for recommendations.
Give them several, come talk, go to Angie's list.
So
Something.
there's also, GAR has a member affiliate directory where like they vet. In order to be approved by them, you have to go through a process. What? The,
The world I used to live in, they had moving companies
mhm.
and they weren't properly licensed or insured. They were just somebody's friend.
But that GAR approved,
Yeah,
really?
That process has changed then, because they do have,
They have, yeah, it's a pretty strict vetting process. It's all online, but it's gar.com/affiliate directory.
anyway,
there's an application process to become an affiliate, and they have to show licensing, they have to show
Right.
bonding.
but they were confusing having a business license with a motor carrier's license.
So before we refer anyone, we need to cross check it.
Well, just be really careful.
I just guess people, the lawyers have gotten into this and have recommended that we don't give you recommendations. I tell the truth and say now it's become lawsuits. And I don't manage these businesses. I don't know who the employees are at any one
Right.
time.
Mhm.
Now, if you find somebody, ask me, and if it's somebody that I personally have had bad experiences with, then I'll tell you that. And they all go, okay. To me, it's kind of odd that people in this day and age don't know how to Google all the same.
Right,
Exactly.
They want you to do all the work.
Yeah,
Right.
We had,
They expect you to.
one where one of our brokers had her dad doing all the repairs. And that buyer called and said, even though she thought the realtor did a good job, she would never, ever use her again. Nor would she recommend her because her dad was rude. He wouldn't show up when he said he was gonna show up. So just please be really
it's more
careful.
business with through bad recommendations than just saying, I don't get involved in that, you're better off if you find them yourself. And 9 times out of 10, people kind of go, okay,
They just Google it and.
Google it.
Right.
Or
And
they
then
ask
they're
their
not
mother.
liable.
Yeah. Angie's List.
So just stay out of it.
Right.
Neither.
Yeah, but if you absolutely have to recommend somebody,
Yeah,
give them at least 3 names and say, I check with people in my office. These are people who have done a good job in the past, but then always use the caveat, however, any realtor or any inspector can have a bad day.
Yeah.
And miss something.
True.
So,
Talk to Maria Familia about how she handles that.
okay,
She has people sign, she has all sorts of,
oh yeah, disclaimers.
yeah, she's spent,
Don't come and
like a
get
mad
me.
scientist, spent a lot of time. on this.
yeah.
Maria Familia,
Yeah.
Okay, so
very thorough.
any questions on page 3? Okay, that was
No.
pretty much the juice of it.
Oh, no.
Okay, so, mediation. Mediation, this would be something that applies just like in the purchase agreement. If there is a, situation that arises between you and the buyer broker, mediation would be the first step we would do.
Or the buyer.
Oh, yeah, what did I say?
Buyer broker.
Buyer broker, okay. That would be the first thing we do. There are 2 steps. There's the, OMSPD program, which doesn't cost any money. That would be one option, or mediation, there is a fee.
And I don't, normally a judge will throw it out and say, no, why did you go to mediation? Or,
Right. Yeah, because our contracts say unless you strike out mediation, then they're gonna expect you to try mediation
But
first.
it's not a recommended thing to strike out anything in a contract.
No, it isn't, but, we had some seller who wanted to strike something after, that was yours.
Yes,
Go ahead, do you wanna?
it was something on an escalation clause or,
Oh, that was,
and it was to,
that
the-
was pizza that she bought.
yeah,
No, it was the lady in Colorado. There was something on she had one offer, she had an offer on the first time around, and then I was thinking the mediation maybe. There was a paragraph, anyway, the seller was really upset that she wanted to strike it, but she'd already signed the listing agreement and was in the listing agreement, so we said, no, sorry. And she said, anytime in the future, she was gonna strike that specific paragraph.
Yeah, we got around that. She wanted to rewrite all of this in her own language. She used to be a realtor
yeah,
here
that's
in
right.
Mexico, and then her daughter still is one in Colorado, so she's really bright,
Very
really
smart.
sharp. It's just that.
yeah,
It's like,
but not that smart.
we can't do that.
Right, yeah.
We just can't do that, so.
So, if you
It
have
wouldn't
somebody,
helped her. It
Yeah.
was only gonna be a detriment.
right,
Everything she wanted to change and write,
Right, but-
rewrite.
we had that conversation.
I remember that.
Okay,
I blocked it out. That was a long
yeah, I know.
process.
Some of this stuff I just can't block, as hard as I try.
So much stuff takes a brain where
Yeah.
Alice is headed.
No, it was the lady in Denver. I remember which one it was. Okay, attorney fees and costs, the thing that's on that first sentence is that should any aspect of this agreement result in arbitration or litigation, the prevailing party of such action shall be entitled to an award of reasonable
We don't know
attorney
what that
fees
is.
and court costs. So that's another thing, tell people if you're going to sue and you lose, you could potentially. On this case that we lost with the house that burned down, the attorney fees, the Liberty Mutual was involved, the house was underinsured. Liberty Mutual brought in an attorney from Denver, and the attorney fees on that were more than the sale of the house. So, yeah, so be really careful. FERPTA. The fortunate thing on that one was because we did not have ENO. I asked twice and they turned me down. I pleaded with our, business insurance in the Hartford. I think they're probably still kicking themselves to this day that they said they would cover us, but they did, so that
You're
was,
a good negotiator.
I don't know about that. I think that was our one and done. So, FERPTA, if it is above 300,000, it will, FERPTA, will kick in. So just be really careful if you're representing a buyer and you have a foreign seller and who's getting money on a property that's more than 300,000, they need to pay some of that to IRS. And IRS in their infinite wisdom said, well, if we can't get it from the seller, we're going after you, Mr. Buyer. And if they go after the buyer, then the buyer's going to go after you. So just make sure if it is over 300,000, you have a foreign seller, you get that money up front that needs to go to IRS.
Are they ever gonna change that dollar amount, or are we just gonna keep looking like 350 so that thing?
Well, at this, it's been 300,000 since it, I mean, yeah, that's not
Don't
right.
give them any ideas.
Yeah,
It's only gonna get worse.
Yeah, the IRS hasn't seen. Never mind.
yeah,
The IRS is gonna get more money if they can, I would think.
right, yeah. So we probably shouldn't mention that.
Yeah.
Take that out of this too. Yeah.
Your work's cut out.
Okay, farms and ranches, here again, go through this. We haven't sold a farm and a ranch for several years, so, just read through this if you do have somebody who's interested in buying a farm and ranch. And then paragraph 21, it just says, this is the entire agreement. If you have anything to include, it needs to go on the addenda. Force majeure, they beefed up this paragraph after COVID to include pandemics and diseases. And even during COVID, there wasn't a time when the government shut down that you couldn't do business. You could still do business. So force majeure is in there. It's more descriptive than it used to be, but here again, that didn't even happen during COVID. Paragraph 23, it just says if any portion of this agreement becomes invalid or unenforceable, that the rest of the agreement does stay in effect. Errors and assigns, this is something that, bless you, that if one of the parties for some reason dies, we had one where the husband and wife buyers were driving over from Arizona and the husband died in a car wreck. The seller, the buyer wife was still obligated to go through with the sale.
That,
Yeah,
What kind of heartless seller would
I know.
make them, you know, that would be a terrible.
Somebody who'd already bought another house and needed the money.
I guess couldn't you get out if she didn't qualify?
Well, she didn't qualify, right, but I think they were paying cash
Yeah.
on that one, yeah. It was very sad.
Yeah, that is sad.
Yeah.
At least she had the cash.
Right, and it all, yeah, like, and this also says, in addition to, it's their representatives, their successors, permitted assigns, errors, and estates, so that's pretty all encompassing. So, okay, the authority of the assigners, if this is, like, if an LLC is buying a house, paying cash, or like a trust, then the person who's signing for that trust needs to have the authority to be able to buy the property.
Did you ask for?
I would. Yeah, just say, show me in your documents where you have the authority to buy this house for the trust or for the.
and I think the title company would probably help you ask. Then we'll buyer for trust documents and things, yeah.
And actually, if you have a buyer who has a trust, it would be good to get a copy and give it to the title company so they can review it, because some trusts don't have the verbiage in there that's required. You know, you have to be able to sell, buy, convey, lease, let, whatever. It's got to have certain specific. So they could think they have a trust that will serve and it may not have the right verbiage. So just get a copy of it and then have the title company, their legal department review it.
Because they get a verb that finds you.
Yeah.
Their legal department.
Okay, any questions about page 4? All right, page 5 at the top, these specific paragraphs are the ones that survive after closing. So 7B, 15, 16, 17, 18, 21, 22, 23, 24, and 26. So if something arises after closing, then just know these continue.
The survival of obligation survives.
I know, yeah, exactly, yeah. Paragraph 26 survives, yeah, so. Additional terms, is there anything you put in there?
Not generally. I mean, not as a template, no.
Okay. Anybody think of anything that might be an additional term?
If the builder,
No, pardon me?
if the builder does it.
Right, yeah. Oh, yeah, you could, but yeah,
Could you,
Like,
yeah.
could we write something here like where, if listing broker is offering more compensation than we would reach in this document, we reserve the right to addend this document or something like that, so it's spelled out.
yeah, you
Is
could
that
do that.
acceptable?
It's just that, yeah, it would have to be transparent, you know, because of this huge lawsuit, they're saying that the reason for this is there wasn't enough transparency. So that's why they're saying it has to be an exact amount. If it's any amount different than that, you would need an addendum.
Right. Just, yeah, I was just trying to think how like getting around this, okay, you know, making sure that they know that they may have to, you might ask them
Right,
to amend this broker
Yeah.
compensation if it's, hey, the seller's gonna offer more than what we agreed to.
you know, and in the past, the sellers haven't had to offer bonuses, but our market is changing. They're seeing price reductions. Houses are on the market longer, so it could be such a thing that in addition to a 3%, a seller could be offering compensation, additional compensation or a bonus to you as a buyer broker.
Disclose and amend.
So that would be another reason to mention that in there.
But just basically, but saying that this, you know, we can amend this if they offer more.
Right.
Because then you're having that conversation and expectation up front. And say, you know, there are times that builders will give us more compensation.
Right.
We're not gonna give you incentives, but you're already having that conversation, so when you do, like, just what we were talking about, when somebody does come up and say, hey, you know, the builder is gonna offer me 4%. And we're addending this, and that you're already had that conversation, remember when we had that conversation?
Mhm. But I like, yeah, that's a great idea, putting it in that area for additional terms. Okay, then this one is in italics, so it says, here again, it's a CYA. New Mexico Association of Realtors and the Local Board or Association of Realtors do not fix, control, recommend, suggest, or maintain compensation rates for services to be rendered by members, not the division of the broker's compensation between the broker and the cooperating brokers in a transaction. The amount of compensation and the terms of this agreement are not prescribed by law and are subject to negotiation. So this is about the third time they've had in bold italics that nobody's price
Yes.
fixing.
And
Amy,
yet,
what did
here
you
we
say?
are.
Yeah.
Right,
Yeah, Amy, what did you say a minute ago, because I couldn't hear you?
Oh, I'll share it with you later.
I-
I wrote this down on one recently. Yeah.
I was gonna say, sorry, going back to that talking point about additional terms in the event that like a new construction was offering more. I think we might want to revisit that, because I mean, according to NAR. The buyer agreement must include one of the 4 components, a term that prohibits the agent from receiving compensation for brokerage services from any source that exceeds the amount or rate agreed to in the agreement with the buyer.
That's why you just changed the agreement.
That's why you amend the
Mhm.
agreement, so.
With okay, with the
Yeah, so
amendment.
that last
Yeah.
term on
Right.
27 saying, you know what, if somebody's gonna offer me more, buyer, we're gonna come back and amend this agreement. We may come back.
Right, so leave the terms blank, but then come in with the addendum. Okay,
Yeah.
sorry if I missed that.
yeah, so, you know, because I mean, it could be. You know, maybe you've shown them a Hicks Brothers and LG and maybe DR Horton and DR Horton, like they were here the other day. And they said, oh, we've got these great rates and oh, by the way, you know, we've got these specs available and we will pay you a bonus. That would be a case where you would want to mention that. And then you also have to be concerned that the buyer may think, oh, well, maybe that realtor steered me to DR Horton because they were to get more money. That's the main thing we have to make sure we are totally
And of course,
transparent.
that's the purpose of their bonuses.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Is so we can write it in the additional terms and an addendum, or just do the addendum?
well, if, it would just be in here for now, but then if it rises, then you're gonna know how much more, and then you'd need to do an addendum.
So you would actually put it in here initially.
Right, but you're not gonna know what the amount is, so it wouldn't be specific amount. NAR is saying it has to be exact. If it says 3% in here and somebody's offering 3.5, you have to do an addendum to disclose that other 0.5%.
And then you'll have to change it back if that transaction doesn't work out, you go back to a different bid.
Or you just write the addendum specific to that one property.
Yeah, that would be the way to do it.
Right, with that address, and then you don't get
Then
it,
it would
you
be
just
null
go
and
back.
void.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's just so, it's so clean, I
It
love
all
it.
results in more paperwork for all of us.
right. And as I say, there will be,
That's all of it.
by the first, there will be a shorter version to this buyer broker. So as soon as it's out, we'll have another class, and I haven't seen it yet, but I will get, as familiar with it as I can. There's another one that, Go has written for New Mexico, so once August 1st comes around, we can go over that one too, if you want to use the Go one. I personally think I would rather have one that's been approved by the state. When it comes to our ENO and
State
everything else.
association.
State association, right, not the commission.
Yeah,
So-
go with.
Next class would be the fifth after the new papers come, after the new forms come out. Is that gonna be all, the whole class will be on on the fifth?
What day is that?
It's a Monday.
I don't, actually, probably what I'll do, I'll see how much I can glean from when they come out, they're saying sometime between August, or July 26th and August 1st, but I don't know.
Okay.
I mean, the only place they're gonna be available is at the NMAR site. I doubt that any of the vendors will have it by that time. And then Ashley Strauss Martin has her legal update the 13th and the 15th of August. So I always go and take pages on notes, so I may wanna wait till she can explain it in person for me to bring it back.
I just wanna
And
make
then,
sure I
and then
understand.
and Beverly's too,
Beverly's is what day?
August 22nd.
Okay,
Form 1820 is under review. It says you can't access it. It says, revisions are being made on it.
oh, okay, so that's probably one of the 10 that's coming out next week.
And what is that document address?
The 1820 is the information sheet for MLS. So
Because you have zeroing and all that.
This- you can get this out of NMAR. These are the new ones we had as of now. And I don't know what this form number is. It just says new and revised NMAR forms effective April 2nd, 2024. And that's what we have as of this moment. But then as of the 28th, 26th to the 1st, there will be like 10. 10 sounds like a huge number, but then Ashley was saying California has either 27 or 28 new forms.
That doesn't surprise me.
Glad we're not there.
It doesn't surprise me at all.
Does anybody have any questions? Oh, Kelly,
So I had a conversation with the buyer and they say, they can start a contract with me with 3%. But if later when the seller only offer 2.5%, can we do the addendum because they won't have the difference to pay for me?
well,
But now they don't want to put 2.5 because in case the seller see that and they don't want to pay up to 3%.
oh, I see. Okay, so what Kelly said, and let me make sure I understood this, that her buyers are apprehensive to say they'll pay up to 3. So Kelly's question is, can the buyers say they'll pay up to 2.5? And then if the seller's not willing to pay more than that, then modify your buyer broker to now say 3%. Is that right?
Like 2.5. So they signed a contract with me at 3%.
Okay,
But if the seller only offer 2.5, can we do the addendum with the?
And just
buyers?
rewrite
The
it.
other-
well, you wouldn't, actually, this says in here that they're covered if it's less.
Right,
So, let me just see where that is.
yeah, you'd only need the addendum in the event it was
More, right, yeah,
Isn't that nice? They want us to make love.
Yeah.
yeah. So then it says, if the buyer agrees to pay the brokerage, the brokerage's expected compensation minus any amounts that the brokerage is able to collect from the listing brokerage. So it's right in that, it's in 6B that it covers that.
But it's been the seller.
But what you're
pays
asking, he
2.5.
wants an extra 0.5%.
Yeah, so the seller.
So you
pays
just write it
2.5.
into the offer, I think.
Right.
So then the buyer, you'd write an addendum for the buyer to pay the 0.5% to make up the difference.
If they don't-
but they don't have it,
I think if we are willing to take 2.5.
Yeah, I feel like, yeah, if you're just willing to it sounds like they're gonna do 3%, so you can move your 3%, but if a broker is only offering 2.5.
And
You
you're
wanna just amend this with your buyers
Yeah.
later,
so that you'll
That's-
That I want,
right?
I would not ask them to pay the.
Yeah.
Because they don't have
So
money.
I think you would
Oh.
just amend it, you would just write an amendment for that broker
Oh, I
agreement
see.
for that specific property. And just that way you're only changing for that property, that way in case that property doesn't go under contract, you still got your 3% on the BBA. But you've written an addendum that says, I'll amend it for this for this property. And we're gonna take 2.5% from the listing broker, right? Is that about right?
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay.
Sorry, like, just kind of switch gears and let's try to answer. So when you have a listing and someone calls you and says, how much is the seller gonna pay? We don't have to tell, we can just say, we welcome all offers, right?
Yeah, we welcome all offers and, probably depend on the terms. I mean, because say you have it listed for 500,000 and, they don't necessarily have to sit, okay, so you have it listed at 500. And if they come in at 425, then your seller may say, I'm not paying them anything. So it really depends on what the actual offer is, and you're not gonna know till you get it.
And so like professionally, we should be calling each other because we're good people. But like, we're probably gonna get to the point where we're just all gonna be telling each other, bring us your best offer, right?
Right,
Which is what we're already doing. anyway.
right. And Shirley, if you're representing a buyer broker, you gotta include that 2301.
Okay,
Mhm.
That's gonna be your friend.
On here, after the italicized paragraph, it says NMAR form 1205.
Where, which page?
The final page 5, where that paragraph you just went over with the italicized.
Mm-hmm.
The
It
broker
says,
agreement to-
yes, no, and then NMAR 1205.
1205 would be the agency,
Oh,
that we're not gonna do agency.
okay.
Yeah.
So we would write no.
Yeah, we're always gonna check no.
Always
I apologize if I jumped over that box.
I have,
And then, buyer fraud, I mean, we had this last week. Somebody tried to get money.
On a wire.
Yeah, on a wire, so you cannot be too careful on this.
sorry, one more. So like, say I have a buyer. And we make the offer on a house and we put the 2301 that says seller's gonna pay me 3%. And they counter back and say, we're not gonna pay you. The buyer says, we don't have 3% to pay you either, even though we read this thing to cover this amount, like this is outside of our pre-qual. Then I just tell them, sorry, you just can't get this house, right?
Everything else.
Yeah,
We're just moving on.
yeah, or, yeah, I can't represent you.
You don't have to work for free.
Yeah,
Right.
okay, but so I can tell them like, hey, you can.
Yeah, well, just say, you're gonna do
it.
everything
Rains, but I know.
you can to get a seller. No, they say, I think. The fact that our market's changing, I mean, if this was a requirement a year ago, a seller's gonna say, I'm not paying anything. I've got 27 offers here, I can take my pick.
Yeah.
But with houses staying on the market longer and, lack of inventory, and I think it truly, and the interest rates, I think it truly is tipping toward a buyer
Yeah.
You could
buyer market.
You could also offer more to
Yeah,
the seller,
that's-
so that it does come out of the seller's pocket. So if you got a $400,000 house, the buyer doesn't have it, offer 3% more than 400,000, and then the seller's paying.
Then
And
you
then it
just-
doesn't appraise.
Yeah.
Well, then that's always.
May or may not.
Right.
That's always- Like,
Or if it's a cash offer or
True, yeah.
whatever, yeah.
but I mean, like, there's always been a point where buyers just can't qualify for that house, like, sorry, Charlie, like, we just move on to the next one, like,
The right house.
yeah, like, so we.
Well, and I was there for a while, VA loan said that the buyer could not pay the commission. Now they have since modified that. So a VA buyer can pay a buyer broker.
So a lot of this is gonna be educating them how we can work around these things
Right.
too, like that's.
I think the whole thing's gonna break eventually and the public's gonna be real upset. Because they're gonna find out they weren't being protected. Because the process is gonna break. This is just my personal opinion. I just think it's all.
Question.
Then all of a sudden the buyers are gonna go, wait a minute, this isn't helping us at all.
Right now. Brianne, did you have a question?
Yeah, I think I'm just confused. Maybe it's a dumb question, but so you said the 2301 and you attach that to your offer. Do you also include your compensation in the offer or I think I'm confusing myself.
I would just use the 2301.
Okay.
That's seller telling the buyer.
Yeah.
Because as it is now with our code of ethics, which I'm sure this will probably change, it says that you can't discuss commission in the purchase agreement because the purchase agreement is between a buyer and seller.
Okay.
Commission isn't. So I would just do the 2301 with the purchase agreement.
But make sure if you're doing these addendums,
Yeah.
that you note them in that portion of the purchase
Yeah.
agreement. That says it's to include this addendum, because if you miss that checkbox, you miss that. Because it's not inclusive of the addendum. I would just make that like really big
So this
highlight.
2301 is pretty pertinent to the purchase agreement.
Yeah, we had one the other day where one of our brokers was representing the buyer. And the seller had said that he wasn't gonna pay New Mexico gross receipts tax on our portion of the commission. So I said, use a 2301 and, you know, that way, ask for the, in the GRT.
I would expect, already seeing people are using addendums incorrectly to ask for commission. We just got one on an offer last week for one of our listings. Where they literally said on an addendum that was signed by the buyer and going to the seller pay buyer's broker 3%.
That was after big time, after big time.
I think a buyer, you're not a party to the contract.
Right, I know,
So
but that was the listing broker asking, or this buyer's broker asking for compensation.
Can we send that back and
But
say we
they're
want
not
a
asking
301?
for
They
it. The
were.
buyer is asking on behalf of their buyer's broker. The buyer is signing the addendums, the buyer is signing the contracts, but you're not a party to that contract. You're not signing,
Right.
it's just like asking the seller to pay Carpet World, you know, for $20,000 worth of carpet.
So I guess that's this whole thing where we've never supposed to have been talking about commission.
You can't make,
buyers
you
and
can't,
sellers
the
or
way
buyers.
I've understood it is you can't make the offer conditional. It's because it happened to me like 200 years ago, where the listing broker came back and said, the seller, because it was back then, it was unconditional compensation. So you couldn't condition the offer on reducing the compensation. And the listing broker came back and said, the seller will agree to this price if the buyer broker reduces their commission. And that wasn't allowed.
But so the addendum coming from the buyer though, saying isn't that not a condition too? Like this offer, one of the conditions of my offer is that you're going to pay, the seller will pay this much.
I think
Is that
Ashley
also
said
not
that was okay
a
to do.
condition?
Well, I just use 2301.
Well, no, I wasn't being, this was what was coming at us, right? And-
Right.
Right, and
Oh,
that's,
yeah.
so I was like, why is this broker not just sending us the compensation agreement? That's what I would.
Yeah,
The
that would be
broker
another way to
told
go.
us she had 30 years in the business. I'm like, why isn't she using the
She probably doesn't
compensation?
know.
agreement?
That one is form 1108. That's
Right.
compensation and cooperation broker.
She had 1 year of experience 30 times in a row.
Yeah. Tony, did you have a question?
I was just gonna say, like, you could use the addendum to write the compensation, wherever it is, it doesn't protect you. Like, hey, I didn't understand.
I think it's 1108, but
Well, in the past, because of code of ethics,
Yeah.
you know, they've always said we shouldn't discuss. The only time we would discuss commission is like if I'm buying it and I want my commission, I could do it. But the realtor is not a party to the purchase agreement. That's why we have cover page 1 and 2. That is separate. The actual purchase agreement doesn't start until page 1.
But it's better to, not the broker one, it's better to do the compensation one,
Right,
2301.
I think the 2301,
It's 1108.
1108 is the compensation and cooperation broker to broker.
So. Yeah, so, well, could you go back in that instance and say, hey, you know, do you really mean that you want to have that 2301?
Well, and she didn't win anyway, but so it was like, became a.
So I have a question. So one of the things that you just said was that if it was 500,000 and they come back and they say, they offer 430,000 and then the seller says, they've signed, I'm gonna pay it buyer's broker 3%. And they turn around and say, I'm not going to pay it because it's so low. Then what are you gonna do? I mean, you've already have a signed agreement at 3% to the buyer's broker.
Well, I would probably reject the offer. And now,
It used to say, with acceptable, there's those
With acceptable
bonuses,
offer.
with
Yeah.
acceptable
We'll
offer.
do this, yeah.
It's not acceptable.
right,
Sorry.
yeah, just reject, I mean,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, people will get creative. We just have to be really careful. We don't want to be the examples. There are gonna be large fines, so we don't want to be the poster child for.
Don't put
fines.
compensation in MLS.
Pardon me?
Don't
No.
put compensation in MLS.
Or anything, it's not just an MLS, it's anything that has the IDX feed that goes to MLS.
Right.
If you want to,
Question for Linda,
okay,
and it's completely off of the buyer broker agreement. It's
Uh-oh.
more about.
I didn't know him, I really did.
I know you do because you write it everywhere and I'm like, I want it. The offer expiration.
Oh, God, it's my favorite thing.
I know, and I just want to make sure I know exactly.
Okay, so I've written an offer and that offer expires. I've written an offer to you.
you represent the buyer.
I represent the buyer and it says this offer shall expire for acceptance at Tuesday at 6 p.m. And Tuesday at 6:15, you're calling me, or okay, let me go back.
Yeah.
I'm writing an offer. It expires Tuesday at 6 o'clock. I don't hear from you at 6:15 on Tuesday. And I'm that other broker. And I'm calling you going, Marie, where's my offer? And you're going, we might counter it. We might counter it tomorrow. We might counter it Monday. And I don't understand that.
That's the seller speaking, the listing broker
Yeah.
speaking.
Yeah, so Marie's telling me, we'll get around to it. And meanwhile, I've told my buyer, oh my God, they're not gonna answer it. It expired for acceptance. So I have in the past received, back in those days, not too long ago, you received 10 offers on a house. And one of them wins, the other ones go away. That offer falls through for whatever reason. I go back to the other people who have written offers as a courtesy. That's just how I like to do it.
Yeah, and counter.
And I found somebody that said, my buyer will do anything to get this house. And I say, okay, so how about we just counter a closing date? And then you win.
You can always find something.
Then it's accepted because a counter offer is a new offer. And so it incorporates everything in that offer. You could literally go back a year later. The purpose for the expiration is so that the buyer has the ability to go buy something else.
Okay.
It releases the buyer of the obligation for that offer. The seller they can shop, they can do whatever they want, they can go to sleep, they can go on vacation, they can counter something literally 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 2 months later.
New offer.
But it had to be a counter, not, because the seller couldn't sign it.
Just a counter offer.
They
So,
really-
the second winning buyer had written an offer. And it was pretty perfect, but seller chose another offer.
Right,
I went back to that, found that person, and she said, oh my God, what do we do to get this house? And I said, just send me, we're gonna send a counter offer on a closing date.
but the seller couldn't sign the original.
They could, they would
Have to
sign
counter.
rejects and submits counter.
Yeah, they would just sign reject.
Right, I mean, I know they would, but they had to send a counter, not just sign the.
Correct.
Yeah.
Agreement, they have to send a.
Just send a counter.
It could be something minor, you know.
Right.
Change the
right.
closing date from
Okay.
the fourth to the third.
Would you
Right.
recommend that over an addendum to the purchase agreement?
Yeah, addendum wouldn't change the,
Extending the
Right.
offer expiration?
no, there's no need to extend an offer expiration.
You just.
Unless the
find out.
buyer wants to be out there trying to not buy something else.
Well, I mean, just to be on the time where the parties
You
sign.
can't really extend a deadline that's been.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because that deadline was only for acceptance, so you're sending back a calendar, not an acceptance.
Mhm.
So therefore, you're not outside of the deadline.
It's the deadline is for the buyer, the deadline is
I
not
see.
for the seller to counter.
Right,
That's the best way to explain it.
the expiration date for the offer is for the benefit of the buyer, so that, you know, Tuesday at 3 o'clock, they may find another house. And wanna go buy something else, so then they look at their watch and then if they decide to withdraw their offer before the expiration, don't ever do it for them. Don't ever call up and go, hey, Alice, my buyer's backing out. And Alice goes, great. She tells her seller, sign it right now. You've got a deal, cause I didn't have authority to speak for my buyer.
You're not the wire broker, you're a transaction broker.
Yeah, so get a text, get an email, get something in writing from your client that says, I want to withdraw this. Happened in Santa Fe, a Santa Fe person bought the house twice, so. It's scary, that's why you don't want to do agency. It was an agency attorney that owned a big house in Santa Fe. He was an expert in agency law. So the buyer broker called the listing broker and said, buyers withdrawing their offer, see you later, bye. And the attorney looked at it and he signed it. And they said, nope, you bought the house.
It's not in writing.
Right.
He didn't have authority. We don't have authority to speak for our clients.
So it needs to come from the seller.
I get this most annoying thing lately, just pet peeve number 652. I get calls from buyer brokers and they'll say, what do you know about the well? How deep is the well? How old is the well? How old is the roof? How old is this? And how much carpet? And is it my house? Do I look like seller's disclosure? But don't ever do that, because that broker shouldn't be talking about the house unless there's a piece of paper that says that. So, no, I don't know how deep the well is.
Almost every buyer asks about the roof.
Oh, yeah.
I did.
When they have to get insurance, they'll call and say, how old? the roof?"
I just respond, those are questions related to a purchase agreement. We'll answer those when you write an offer.
We
I
had somebody,
can't answer those questions. Yeah. I don't know. Don't ever make it up, trust me.
Yeah.
we had somebody, yeah, the other day who, the seller said that it was a new roof. When we did the inspections, it was the original roof. And the house was like 20 years old.
But new was relative.
Yeah.
No, never say new. There's been so many cases that we have looked at in the past year where it has to do with the word new.
Right.
It's never new. As soon as you drive your car off the lot, it's not new. It's new to you. But just always quote a date, you know,
Yeah.
roof installed 60 days ago by so-and-so. It's
Mhm.
not new. But don't ever say new, because it never is new. Don't ever say all polybutylene pipes have been replaced. Unless you were the plumber who did it. That was another one.
Mm.
Just tales from the crypt, but. So you're not an agent, you can't speak for your client, don't make stuff up, don't misrepresent anything. Just, you know, I know we all want to be helpful, but we're not all that smart.
And have something in writing from the
Always
seller.
in writing.
Right.
You can even ask, by the way, another Tales from the Crypt recently, if your seller, even if you're not an agent, wants you to keep confidentiality in place regarding the sale, you can actually put that in an addendum. And you don't have to be an agent to do it, but that seller specifically instructed that no details of this sale will be exposed to anybody.
How do you do that, right? MLS and take it out of the MLS?
No, this was a big ranch. Yeah, I don't.
But I
know if
guess
it
you
was an
would,
MLS.
you would, yeah, I mean, if the seller is
You could
saying
probably
no,
do that.
or, I mean, sometimes the buyer doesn't want the world to know what he paid, so if either party. Then.
Wants
write
it
MLS.
super confidential, yeah.
It's not gonna happen with a $400,000 house, but it could happen with something, you know, and then sometimes, like, the buyer doesn't want to say who they are, so they may say, you know, and or signs. So you don't really know who you're dealing with. All right, any other questions? Thank you, everybody, and
Thank you.
as soon as those new forms out, we'll regroup.